Ma'am, this isn't a county fair. The ropes are there for a reason. Some people just don't grasp the concept of a perimeter. The crowd of families, crisp in their Sunday best under the unforgiving Coronado sun, chuckled nervously. Petty Officer First Class Thorne, the man in charge of seating, puffed his chest out, enjoying the moment of authority. The woman he addressed, Alara Vance, offered no reaction. She was a study in unassuming gray, a simple linen blouse, sensible shoes, her hair tied back, without ceremony. She looked like a librarian or a history teacher, soft around the edges, entirely out of place amidst the rigid geometry of a BUD/S graduation. She simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and took a half-step back, her gaze remaining fixed on the formation of young men standing ramrod straight on the grinder. One of them was her son. Thorne, unsatisfied with her quiet compliance, pressed on. "This is a serious day for serious men, ma'am. Try to keep up." She did not look at him. Her focus was absolute. From the dais, Rear Admiral Callahan, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, watched the exchange. He saw Thorne's performative arrogance, but his eyes lingered on the woman. He saw her stance, feet perfectly balanced, shoulders relaxed, her stillness not one of passivity, but of immense, coiled potential. He saw something he hadn't seen in a very long time. If you believe true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type silence below. Thorne continued his patrol along the line of spectators, his voice a low, condescending hum meant to be overheard. He was making an example of Alara, using her as a prop to demonstrate his own importance. "It's always the same," he muttered to a junior sailor, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The dependents show up thinking it's a parade. They don't understand the discipline. They don't understand the sacrifice that got these men to this field." He gestured vaguely in Alara's direction. "They think because their son is a frogman, they're suddenly part of the club." A few people shifted uncomfortably, the second-hand embarrassment a palpable heat in the air. The injustice of it was a bitter taste. This woman had done nothing but stand with quiet pride, a half-step over an imaginary line, and was now the subject of a public lecture on military etiquette. Yet, her composure remained absolute. Her hands, clasped loosely in front of her, were perfectly still. Her breathing was even and slow. Her silence was a fortress, and Thorne's verbal assaults were arrows shattering against its stone walls. She was an island of calm in a sea of his making, and her refusal to be agitated, to be drawn into his petty drama, seemed only to fuel his contempt. Her focus remained singular. Her son, Michael, about to receive the trident that symbolized his entry into a world she seemed to know nothing about. The ceremony began, the formal cadence of military tradition filling the air. Speeches were made, accolades given, the weight of the moment settling over the crowd. The California sun was relentless, beating down on the asphalt, turning the air into a shimmering haze. Alara stood motionless, a silent witness to her son's transformation. In her mind, she saw him as a boy, climbing trees with scraped knees, his face full of a boundless, innocent determination. Now, he stood as one of the most formidable warriors on the planet. A wave of pride, so fierce it was dizzying, washed over her. It was followed by the oppressive heat, which seemed to suddenly intensify. A flicker of faintness, a slight graying at the edge of her vision. With slow, deliberate movements that betrayed no weakness, she reached into her bag for a bottle of water. To get a bit of air, she unbuttoned the top button of her high-collared blouse, a practical, almost unconscious gesture against the sweltering humidity. It was a small act, a moment of personal comfort in a day of rigid formality, an action so insignificant that no one should have noticed. But it was the fulcrum upon which the entire day would turn, the tiny key that would unlock a history no one present was prepared for. As Alara leaned forward to take a sip of water, the linen fabric of her blouse pulled taut across her shoulders and shifted, exposing a few inches of skin at the base of her neck. There, just above her shoulder blades, was a tattoo. It wasn't the garish, colorful ink of a youthful rebellion. It was small, precise, and rendered in faded black and a startling silver. It was a design of deep and terrible meaning for the few who would recognize it. A single, ornate key, its teeth fashioned into a trident, wrapped by an Ouroboros, a serpent devouring its own tail. On the dais, Admiral Callahan was in the middle of a sentence about the legacy of naval special warfare. His voice, a powerful baritone that had echoed across hostile shores and in the halls of power, simply stopped. It did not trail off. It ceased, cut clean as if by a knife. A dead, profound silence fell over the graduation field. The rhythmic snapping of a flag in the wind was suddenly the only sound in the world. Thousands of pairs of eyes, sailors, families, dignitaries, snapped from the graduates to the admiral, whose face was frozen, his gaze locked, not on the heroes before him, but on the back of an unassuming mother in the crowd. The silence stretched for 5 seconds, then 10, becoming a living entity, heavy and suffocating. Petty Officer Thorne, his face flushing with anger at the disruption, began to move toward Alara. To him, this civilian woman was now the source of a major breach in protocol, an embarrassment in front of the highest echelons of command. He would remove her, and he would be loud about it. But as he took his first step, Admiral Callahan raised a single hand, palm out. It was not a suggestion. It was a command that rooted Thorne to the spot as surely as if he had been shackled to the ground. The Admiral's face was a canvas of emotions no one had ever seen on the stoic warrior. Shock, disbelief, and something that looked unervingly like reverence. With a grace that belied his age and rank, he stepped away from the podium, leaving his prepared remarks behind. He descended the steps of the dais, his polished shoes making no sound on the astroturf. The crowd of families parted instinctively before him, a human sea receding from an unstoppable tide. He walked with a singular purpose, his eyes never leaving the small, cryptic symbol on Alara Vance's back. The 4-star admiral came to a halt directly in front of Alara. She had straightened up, turning to see what had caused the sudden silence, her expression one of mild confusion. Callahan did not speak to her. Instead, he turned his body slightly to address the graduating class and the assembled audience, his voice now low and resonant, yet carrying to the furthest corner of the field with an electric intensity. "Gentlemen," he began, his gaze sweeping over the young men in their dress whites. "Today, you inherit a legacy forged in fire and water. But every legacy has roots, roots that run deeper and darker than the official histories tell you." He made a small, respectful gesture toward Alara. 30 years ago, when the world was a different kind of dangerous, there was a unit that did the impossible. They went where we could not go. They turned keys and locks we didn't know existed. They were ghosts. Their designation was Task Force 113. We called them the Keyholders. He paused, letting the weight of the name settle. Then, he turned fully to face Alara Vance. His back straightened, his posture shifting from that of a commander to that of a subordinate. He snapped to the most rigid, formal position of attention he had executed in his entire life. His hand came up in a salute so sharp, so precise, it seemed to vibrate with 40 years of unspoken history. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with a profound respect. "Forgive this command's ignorance. It is an honor to have you on this base." The sound that followed was not applause, but the collective, sharp intake of 2,000 breaths. Petty Officer Thorne's face, which had been red with indignation moments before, was now a ghostly white. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a hollow, sickening dread. The Keyholders. The name was less than a rumor. It was a myth, a ghost story told by intelligence analysts and old commandos after too many drinks. A unit so secret its operational files were personally sealed by a president and rumored to have been destroyed. They were not door kickers. They were the ones who silently opened the door from the inside, living for years behind enemy lines, their only connection to home a memory. They were phantoms. And this quiet, middle-aged woman whom he had publicly belittled, this dependent who didn't understand discipline, was one of them. She was not a civilian visiting a foreign world. She was a founding member of its deepest, most secret sanctum. In the formation, her son Michael stared, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman who packed his lunches and the living legend being saluted by a 4-star admiral. The story began its life right there, in the stunned silence, spreading not by word of mouth, but through 1,000 shared glances of dawning, earth-shattering comprehension. The graduation had stopped being about the sons. It was now about the mother. The ceremony eventually resumed, but its heart had been replaced. The remaining speeches felt thin, the pomp and circumstance a pale shadow of the raw, authentic moment of respect that had preceded them. After the graduates were dismissed, Thorne made himself scarce, a ghost of a different sort, haunted by the magnitude of his mistake. The following morning, as Alara and Michael were sharing a quiet coffee before he reported to his new unit, Thorne appeared. He was no longer the strutting gatekeeper. He was a diminished figure, his uniform seeming to hang loosely on his frame. He stood before their small table, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Ma'am," he began, his voice barely a whisper, hoarse with shame. "There are no words. My conduct, my assumption, was a profound failure. A failure of judgment, of character. I am truly sorry." Alara looked up at him, and in her eyes, there was no victory, no anger, only a deep, abiding weariness, the look of someone who had seen far too much of the world's follies. "Respect is a verb, petty officer," she said softly, her voice calm and even. "It's something you do, every day. It isn't granted by rank or uniform. It was not a forgiveness, nor was it a condemnation. It was a lesson, delivered with the same quiet competence that had defined her forgotten service." Thorne nodded, swallowed hard, and walked away, a man irrevocably changed. The story of the Admiral's salute became a piece of institutional folklore at Coronado. It was told to new instructors, to arrogant young officers, and especially to support personnel who worked the gates and the lines. It was a potent, living reminder that the person you dismiss as a nobody could be the one who wrote the book on your entire profession. Weeks after the incident, a new training module was quietly added to the orientation for all non-combat personnel assigned to Naval Special Warfare Command. It covered the history of clandestine and deniable operations, with a special emphasis on recognizing the hallmarks of the quiet professional. The official curriculum never mentioned Alara Vance by name, but everyone knew her story was the reason for its existence. Her son, Michael, carried himself with a newfound gravity. He now understood that the blood in his veins was not just that of a citizen, but of a silent warrior. He served with a profound humility that earned him a different kind of respect among his peers, a quiet authority that echoed his mother's. Alara Vance returned to her quiet life, her name never appearing in any official citation. Her legacy was not etched onto a wall of honor, but into the culture of an institution, a subtle but permanent course correction toward humility and respect. Years later, when Rear Admiral Callahan gave his retirement speech, he spoke little of his own accomplishments. He didn't recount famous battles or list the medals on his chest. Instead, he told the assembled crowd of dignitaries and young sailors about a hot graduation day, about a pompous petty officer, and about a small tattoo on a mother's back that had reminded him what true service looked like. He spoke of the ghosts who walk among us, the silent architects of freedom whose greatest victory is that their names are never known. The legacy of that day, he explained, was not about the public shaming of one arrogant man. It was about the public celebration of an ideal, that competence is its own authority, that strength is proven, not proclaimed, and that the most powerful voice in any room is often the one that says nothing at all. He taught them that a person's worth is not measured by the volume of their claims, but by the weight of their actions. True legacy is not the story you tell about yourself. It is the legend that others whisper with reverence long after you are gone, a testament to a life lived with purpose, precision, and a profound, unshakable silence. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent strength defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.